Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Okay, everybody whistle. I could never whistle. Hey, Tim, how are you in Indiana tonight? How are you in Indiana?
Just whistling along, Tim.
There you go. Hey, we've got a fascinating show tonight. In fact, I'm sitting here at my desk in my office recliner, and I'm imagining that I'm back in Warminster, England, and it's the early 1980s, and I'm there at Cradle Hill with my friend Arthur Shuttlewood. Now, I'm sure that a good percentage of our listeners have heard of Warminster and the appearance of the thing which haunted this town not too far from Stonehenge, just a few miles from Stonehenge as the crow flies, or the whatever flies out there, and the monoliths fly, or maybe they don't fly, but
or the crop circles.
Crop circles, yeah, crop circles, and UFOs certainly have been seen in that area for a long, long time. There's all kinds of legends about strange things in the sky. And starting back in 1963, there was a UFO flap that lasted, well, certainly more than a decade, with thousands of people coming from all over Europe and from the United States to witness UFO phenomena in several different areas there. In fact, an associate of mine, Bryce Bond, who is now deceased, he worked for a local radio station here, and he had called me one day, and he said he was going over to England on a vacation, and what could he do in his spare time? And I suggested that he go and chat up Arthur Shuttlewood, who was the editor of the local newspaper, the Warminster Journal at the time. And he came back. He quit his job at the radio station where he was working as a disc jockey and went on to become a lecturer on metaphysical subjects and a healer. Somehow he had an abduction experience, or walked into a UFO, or something very strange happened to him while he was at Cradle Hill. He saw a couple lights in the sky. He walked into the field, and apparently he disappeared for a period of an hour or so. And when he came back, he had this very bizarre story to tell about meeting human-looking aliens and a not-so-very unattractive space woman.
So at your suggestion, Tim,
yes,
this guy had really a life-changing experience.
Yes, he did. Yes, well, many people who have UFO experiences, of course, it does alter their life. Now, Bryce was remotely interested in the subject because the reason we had been in touch is that he would post the meetings that we had, UFO meetings. I was working for Jim Mosley at the time, and every other week or so we would have meetings at one of the hotels along Times Square, and he would announce it as a public service.
Right.
And so, we were kind of in touch, but he only played Frank Sinatra records and jazz. He did not like rock and roll. So we did not have a lot in common as far as that went. But when he came back, he did telephone me. We ended up publishing his book, unfortunately, after he had passed away. And we have an edition out now that includes his UFO experiences. It's called UFOs Keys to Inner Perfection. But so tonight we're going to go back and revisit Warminster. We're going to hear about the history of the town, what happened there, what people saw, and perhaps find out what is still going on there, if anything. And our guest tonight, I'm very happy to present, is Steve Wills, who I met on Facebook, and he has a very upscale Facebook page devoted to sightings, current sightings, past events at Warminster. and our old buddy Ben Emlyn-Jones, the porter, who has his own YouTube channel and travels around England and has done actually a documentary, a self-documentary on the town of Warminster. So without further ado, I will tell about my sighting there in a little while, but I want to get to the meat of the matter. Ben, you did do a documentary on the subject, which is up there on YouTube. When did you first learn about Warminster, and why were you so interested in following the sightings there?
Well, I first heard about it through my interest in UFOs generally, and I met Steve. I know Steve, and I've met him a few times. And there was an event last year to celebrate the 50th anniversary of basically when a lot of people marked the start of the thing, which was the big event with the local authorities, a town hall meeting, which took place in August 1965. There was a 50th anniversary event of that, which actually took place 50 years to the day at a pub just up the road from the town hall called the Bell. And it was amazing, a really, really great event where I think 100 or more people attended. And apparently it was the longest UFO flap ever. I mean, it lasted from the mid-1960s right up to the early 1980s. And some of the encounters and reports are really quite remarkable. I was talking to Kevin Goodman last night, actually, and he was telling me about Arthur Shuttleworth's books. I'm quite glad because I've got an old copy of one of them, but I'm glad they're coming back out into print. And one guy reported, for instance, some people encountered strange beings as well as seeing things in the sky. Mm-hmm. And there are things like big long pokers. Hot pokers in the sky which exploded in light and things like that. And there was a guy up at Star Hill. He was driving up there in 1970 and he encountered what you might describe as one of the Men in Black. And so it's really amazing occurrences. Now there's just a short distance from Warminster is the Defence Training Estate, which is a Ministry of Defence property, which is basically used as a training centre for soldiers, and it's a very large area, hundreds of square miles. And a lot of the UFO skeptics, they basically say the thing is nothing more than activity at that location. Basically, there's flares, there's tracer fire from weapons, there's loud noises, there's like the explosions, which is what that woman heard. It was just exploding ordnance from the Defence Training Estate. There's helicopters and other strange aircraft, which is basically what people were seeing in the sky. But I mean, people who live in that area, they pretty quickly get to know these things. I mean, Kevin made this point when he was speaking to me. They're familiar with these sites. It's not like these things just appeared overnight. Warminster's right next to the Defence Training Estate and knows exactly, and people there are used to the normal things in the sky. This was no doubt, it was highly unusual, and the people in the town, all of them understood that it was something highly unusual. Otherwise they would not have actually reacted the way they did. The actual 1965 town hall meeting was so packed out, people had to stand outside because there wasn't enough room for everyone in the town hall.
Now there was other odd phenomena reported. I mean, you mentioned invisible beings. I know Arthur Shuttleworth told me when I was there that he could actually hear the sound of somebody like trampling through the brush near where he was standing, and he wasn't the only person to hear this. And they also even saw the brush and the terrain actually move as if somebody was walking along there. And apparently it was they did at one point see the outline of a very tall figure, and they estimated it to be probably around 7 feet tall. Then they also had the phenomena of missing time. Now, not missing time in the sense that people were being abducted, although that did happen to my friend Arthur Shuttleworth. They reported that there was all sorts of weird phenomena going on with their watches and their clocks at home. So that they were missing time in the sense that time was going backward and forward. I mean, it was just a whole. It wasn't just Arthur and some UFO wannabes or UFO buffs. It was the local banker. It was the postmaster. I mean, these were people of pretty high, caliber. They weren't the type of people to have made any of this up. In fact, Arthur started out as a skeptic on this. He, like I say, was a pretty a typical journalist. I don't think he'd ever reported on a UFO sighting in his life. And at first he kind of discredited or poo-pooed the whole phenomena. But then as more and more people started getting in touch with him at the newspaper, he went out and he started seeing these things in the sky for himself. And plenty of of course, you guys would have to agree, plenty of photographic evidence. There was a fellow there who I met. His name was Bob Strong. He was a retired RAF fighter pilot. And this guy had 6 or 7 photo albums full of UFO photos. He would take his tripod and he would mount it on the top of his car, and they'd go out to either Star Hill or Cradle Hill, and all these weird objects. Some of them look like giant bats. Some look like trains. Some look like hula hoops. I mean, you name it, and he photographed it. Unfortunately, he had all these kind people would come by and say, geez, Bob, I'd really like to make a copy of that photograph. And Ben, you know what happens then? You never see the picture again.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the photographs that he took had, by the time I got there in the early 1980s, had completely vanished, which was unfortunate. But he did have some to show me, and some of which we've published in the various books and articles that we've put out on Warminster. And so I did have a sighting there. I was invited by my friend, the Earl of Clancarty, Brinsley Laporte Trench, to speak to this UFO group that they had set up at the House of Lords, an official UFO group. But I took the train out to Warminster and went out with Arthur and a couple of other people. And sure enough, come along about 10 o'clock at night. Here's this object high up in the sky, kind of blinking and flashing and bobbing and weaving. And Arthur went to the trunk of his car and came out with, well, he called it a flashlight, but this was a huge torchlight, and blinked at the object, blink, 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 blink. And the object seemed to maneuver in the sky pretty much in response to his blinking the torchlight at it. And then he gave the torchlight to me, and I blinked it, blink, 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 blink. And sure enough, it seemed to bob and weave as if responding to my trying to communicate with it. We watched the object, I would say, for a good 10 minutes or so, and then the cloud covering came and it started to rain, and we freaked out and left. not because of the UFO, but because of the weather.
A typical Britain.
Yeah. And but we did have not only saw the UFO. Now, by this time though, there were no crowds. I mean, the crowds had vanished. I guess at some point, wouldn't you say, Steve, that there were groups of dozens of people up there at night, right?
Oh yeah, when the phenomenon first hit, yeah, you could have up to 50 to 60 people there. This was in the sort of mid-60s onwards, yeah.
I know that they claimed that there were quite a few celebrities like David Bowie, Mick Jagger, that went up there and had UFO sightings themselves. I guess it was the place to be, and I don't think that anybody was really disappointed. I don't suppose that there were sightings, every night of the week, but enough to keep everybody's appetite wet and coming back to see what they might. Now, Tim, had you read up on the subject? I mean, were you familiar with it before our interview tonight, our conversation?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the Warminster thing had, I think I read about it very early on, and that's one of the things that I'm curious about, and maybe somebody can answer this, is, had there been any other kind of activity in that area before the initial flap, which started in, what was it, 62, 63, something like that? I mean, or did all of this just kind of explode out of nowhere?
I'm looking at a an article posted on Kevin Goodman's page on Facebook, which everybody should actually go to and read up on this. And he says that the actual first sighting was May 19th, 1965. The report came into Arthur Shuttlewood from Hilda, a lady by the name of Hilda Hedgebridge, who informed Shuttlewood that 3 times during the week she saw unusual objects in the sky. She first related this to the Fleet Street UFO group, who passed the information on to Shuttlewood. Now, I don't know how spectacular the sightings were, but I think they did grow in intensity as the weeks passed. I guess it almost seems as if they were trying to get the attention of people. I mean, in most UFO sightings, an object appears and then it disappears. Maybe you might have a flap that lasts for a few days or a week at the most, but this was persistent on a regular basis for, like I say, probably close to a decade. There were books written on the subject, books still being written on the subject, hundreds, if not thousands, of UFO sightings. Was there ever anything issued about the flap over Warminster by the Ministry of Defense?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, there was, as you refer to the House of Lords, I know that the Admiral of the Fleet, Lord Hill Norton, who was actually chairman of the chief of the defence staff.
Yes, I met him.
Yeah, very. He's the man in charge, basically in charge of the UK Armed Forces, and he was on the organising committee for NATO. He commanded a ship during the Battle of the Atlantic in World War II. He's a very high-level man, not some loony. He was very, very keen on the idea of this should be taken seriously. The whole UFO phenomenon should be taken seriously everywhere. And I think he was aware of the Warminster thing. And I mean, you spoke to him yourself. You met the man. He's passed away now, sadly. But, it's what strikes me is it's the Warminster thing is very, very similar to the Mothman phenomena of in your part of the world, West Virginia.
We're going to be breaking away for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to come back and return to Warminster.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with 2 of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And we are back tonight talking about the Warminster thing. And Steve Wills, we had a little trouble with your connection in the first half hour of the show, but I think we've got that fixed. You're sounding a lot better now. So let's continue this conversation. I wanted to ask you what got you interested in the Warminster thing, or maybe just the whole UFO phenomena in general.
Well, I mean, for me personally, obviously when the height of the thing or the Warminster phenomena, I was a little bit too young. I mean, I was about. When I was 13, in about 1983, there was a series of magazines that came out that Ben might be aware of, called The Unexplained. Now, these were a magazine which was, I think it was fortnightly published, or it might even be monthly, but it built up over the weeks and months. And of course, this covered all sort of Forteana sort of things, from spontaneous human combustion to ghosts to UFOs, the whole thing. So that's what initially got me into it. Later on, I obviously picked up books regarding Warminster in particularly. But yeah, I mean, that's where it sort of started for me, just an interest of reading the books and magazines published at the time.
Yeah, they actually here in the United States, they actually made a series of books from those magazines. And,
okay, yeah, right. I didn't realize it was published in the US. Yeah, okay.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I used to, and I may still have a few issues. By the time I was old enough to be able to find them, they were already out of print. But I got them on, like in used bookstores and things like that. So, with the Warminster thing now, the first reports that started coming in dealt rather with a strange sound that people were hearing, rather than people seeing things flying around in the sky. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there was a whole host of sounds that started in 1964 around the Christmas time. Incidentally, yeah. People would say that the sound of their roofs were collapsing, or the roof tiles were being lifted, or something was being scraped across the surface of the roof. In some cases, there was, it sounded like the roof, the chimney stack was falling in, for people to go outside and to see that nothing had happened. So it was almost like a trickster element to some of this stuff.
Well, now, once people started seeing the actual UFOs, were they still hearing the sound?
Yeah, I mean, to my mind, I think it's how the a lot of people ask how the phrase was coined, the thing. I mean, I kind of believe it was because in the first initial part of the strange sounds that people were hearing, it was a kind of ambiguous, and I think that then later on rolled out to the UFO sightings as well. But yeah, I think there was one woman who actually heard the sound and saw what she described as a ball of light in conjunction with it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think the sounds were heard for 4 to 5 months prior to the UFO sightings. I think that's kind of generally accepted, and then from there on in, these people were seeing all these sort of strange sort of elliptical shapes, cigar shapes, and and these orange balls of light, which Arthur coined the phrase of amber gamblers.
That's a good name. Now, what about patterns? I mean, were there any kind of patterns to these sightings? Like people would see them, especially on Wednesday nights, or something along those lines.
Oh, what, Wednesday night? The old sort of John Keel sort of premise.
Exactly.
I don't know. I think they were pretty spread, really evenly spread, but a lot of the initial sightings were actually seen across the town as opposed to going out to the hills. I think Arthur's the one who kind of first got into the whole sky watching thing. In fact, I think pretty much UK gets its sky watching context from probably people like Arthur Shuttleworth, who actually kind of took to the hills around Warminster. But when we look at the phenomenon, we have the initial sort of 64 strange sounds, which then kind of went into the UFO sightings of 65, 66. By that time, there was a real premise of sky watching from the hills, and therefore a lot of the sightings from there on in are all from these kind of points of Clay Hill, or Cradle Hill, or Star Hill, Battlesbury, and Lord's Hill. That's where a lot of the sort of second wave of sightings was seen, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Well, now nowadays, people a lot of times associate UFO sightings with being close to military bases. Was that taken into consideration there at the time? I mean, not so much by the skeptics, saying that people were just seeing things going on, but I mean, did anyone there in Warminster consider that there may have been a connection with all this in the military base?
Well, yeah, I mean, as I think Ben said earlier on, I mean, Warminster is right on the cusp of the Salisbury Plain, which is the British Army's kind of proving and training ground. Right up near Cradle Hill sits the Land Warfare Centre, which was previously known as the School of Infantry. And as you say, if you go on there, certain nights you can see flares, tracer fire, manoeuvres of the army conducting different exercises and the like. But pretty much the local people kind of know if you like, what's what people. But I mean, like I say, I'm pretty sure some of that stuff could be accounted. I mean, it's some of the early satellites of the sort of 60s passing. Yeah, I think there must have been a prosaic explanation for some of it, but I think as one woman described it, she saw what she's described as a railway carriage in the sky. Now, I don't know anything what the army's got or any of the military which could account for that. Do you?
No, well, yeah, it's hard to say sometimes what the military may have up there.
Well, I saw some of those photographs that Bob Strong took, and there were a couple of them that looked like trains in the sky. No doubt about it. Now, undoubtedly, some were taken under time lapse with time lapse photography. So I couldn't tell you. It's kind of hard to judge without having the photographer here to ask important questions. But I had another thing. It just dawned on me. Happened to me. Okay, so I had the sighting, and we watched, like I say, this object seemingly maneuver above our heads in the sky. Now, it wasn't very large. I mean, I would say that it was the size of maybe a basketball or something, but there's no way to determine how high up it really was. Okay, so I took some photographs. Now, not of the object because I knew that wasn't going to come out, but there was a lady there, I believe from Scotland, who was visiting. She had come out on her own sky watch while her husband sat in the car because he was a disbeliever and didn't want to get involved. And it turned out she was so surprised to meet. She knew who I was. And she, of course, knew who Arthur Shuttlewood was. And he hadn't been out there, neither had Bob Strong, for, I guess, quite a while. But since I was all the way from the States, they decided to take me. And, of course, we were lucky enough to have this sighting. Okay, so I took some photographs in the complete darkness. And when the photographs, they were slides, were developed, on the last two slides behind the woman, and I think Arthur, or maybe it was the woman and her husband if he had gotten out of the car by that time, were these zigzag lines somewhere in the sky in the background. You couldn't tell how far away they were or anything, but I've seen the same kind of pattern in photographs that other individuals, contactees and silent contactees have taken, like Stella Lansing, Tim, took all these photographs and all these weird. Well, I can't find the color slides now. Of course, like I say, this was in the early 1980s, and I have no idea where they are. I did print one of them, I know, in black and white, but I can't even tell you where that is. But that was another strange event that kind of culminated the night. So there were all kinds of strange things that were being seen in the sky. But anyway, were there any patterns? I mean, as far as the days of the week, or when they the times at night when they might appear?
Well, I'm just trying to think. I think, like I said to Tim, the other Tim. I think the other Tim. Right, yeah, Tim too. Or yeah, I think
Timbuktu. Timbuktu. That's what we are.
Yeah, I think they were pretty, broad, really. I don't think there was any specific. A lot of them were seen, nighttime, lights in the sky, as Arthur would describe them, lits. Yeah. So that, yeah, most of them would have been at night, nocturnal ones. But yeah, I mean, I think it was quite an even spread, really, in terms of the sightings. Some were seen in the daytime. I'm not sure about days of the week in particular.
Yeah, that would probably be meaningless anyway, because if you had 1,000 sightings, one hour in one day is going to show up more than anything else. I never considered even John Keel's thing Wednesday night at 9 o'clock to be too much of a pattern. I mean, because some hour there's got to be more sightings than the other if you're accumulating hundreds of reports. But Steve, did you ever have a sighting there?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, we've seen from Cradle Hill what Arthur would describe as lights in the sky, which are by the very kind of definition anomalous. But I mean, I wouldn't sort of nail me sails on the mask and say that that was some sort of interplanetary craft or sorts. But yes, we've seen sort of strange lights in the sky. Yeah, for sure.
Now I opened this up to both of you to comment. I believe, was it you, Steve, that sent me a video of the astronomer Patrick Moore? Is that his name?
That was me, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who apparently had a sighting and all there, and nobody knows about it because, of course, he was very anti UFO, very skeptical as far as the appearance of unexplained phenomena in the sky.
Yeah, I mean, Arthur appeared in a documentary, and I'm trying to. Can You Speak Venusian, which was a documentary which was hosted by the astronomer, British astronomer Patrick Moore. Now, apparently they were up on Cradle Hill, and a couple of times there was an object went across the top of the copse, which Patrick Moore actually was there and observed. Now, this wasn't actually inserted into the BBC documentary for whatever reason, so we'll never know whether that was a satellite, which Patrick Moore contended it was, or it was something a little bit more exotic, if you like.
Well, even if it was something more exotic, he never would have admitted it.
Probably not.
Yeah. Well, now, wasn't Patrick Moore? Wasn't he alleged to have also have written the book? What was it? Flying Saucers from Mars.
Yeah, he authored a book under a pseudonym. I can't remember the title of the book. Yeah,
was it Cedric Allingham?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah,
because we have a reprint of the book.
Oh, right.
Yeah, of course. I believe that we combined that one. It's from the golden era of flying saucers. Tim, didn't we combine that one with Dino Crespondian's contactee story from South America? And of course, now the photographs by Allingham are quite, I guess you would say, spectacular. They resemble almost entirely George Adamski's pictures. Now, of course, UFO photos are fairly easy to fake, even in those days. Perhaps easier to fake now than back in the early 1950s. But the thing that book had going for it was a photograph of a Martian, right? Except that the Martian was walking away from the camera. So you never, and it was kind of blurred. And there was a photograph released of supposedly of the author who didn't look like the astronomer at all. Yeah. I mean, he obviously put a beard on somebody. So that's one of the classic, possibly a hoax contact stories. I mean, it's a good story, and I think the book did very well for its time, following on the heels of George Adamski's Flying Saucers Have Landed.
Well, now I'm curious, gentlemen, and either one of you can answer this. How long did it take for the story to get out? Across the nation, and then like the out of town crowd started to show up to see for themselves.
Well, I think I've said before. I think the Gordon Faulkner photo was pivotal in terms of as soon as that photo kind of came out, that went into the Daily Mirror, which is a daily tabloid newspaper over here. As soon as that kind of went into the pages of the Daily Mirror, which they actually printed a whole centre page spread about the phenomenon. I think I've actually got the clip in here, but I think that was the pivotal point when it kind of the UK and perhaps the rest of the world had sort of heard about the Warminster thing. At that point, they probably only heard little snippets here and there.
And I mean, are we talking about like just a few people at a time, or I mean, did the town get overrun for a while?
Well, it did. I mean, as I think Ben said, on the August bank holiday over here in the UK, there was an extraordinary meeting which took place where the local town councillor had to kind of allay the fears of the good townspeople that the town wasn't actually being invaded by flying saucers. That was bizarre in itself, but yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. Now, when did? Okay, so now we've gone from people hearing like strange noises in the sky, and then started seeing UFOs. When did people start then having experiences with alleged entities?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that came from the actual people. A lot of people actually came to the town, and people would sort of stay for holidays, so they could kind of sky watch from it, in and around the locations. I think a lot of that stuff occurred from the late 60s on towards the 70s for some of the kind of contactee type experiences. Yeah.
Well, what can you give us an example of some of these entity reports?
Well, I mean, I think I got the name Chris Trubridge. He actually, alleged to have seen some sort of object touching down in a field not far from Cradle Hill, and on approaching it, to his right-hand side, he saw what he described as a 7-foot tall humanoid type figure. This would have been, I think this was tail end of the 70s, yeah. But there was a couple, as Ben will say, Mike Oram, who's someone who's known to both myself and Ben, he's had some strange experiences around the Star Hill, which he used to watch what he described as craft coming down, following the contours of Battlesbury, landing, and he had a lifetime of contactee type experience with people he calls his space brothers. So kind of the skeptics and even myself, you find it kind of difficult to believe, but there's so many kind of reports of this in and around the area.
Now, didn't these locations like Cradle Hill and Star Hill, didn't they kind of have a history of weird things going on there? I mean, Star Hill obviously got its name from something hundreds of years ago, but weren't there some urban legends or folklore about other events that had happened there?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. Well, a lot of the areas are kind of ancient hill forts, aren't they? Anyway, so I mean, they're steeped in mythology, if you like. But yeah, Clay Hill certainly, which is a hill which is very close to the Longleat estate, which was the UK's first kind of safari park. There's a hill there which, if you look at kind of ancient lore, there's stuff relating to fairies and elementals and lights seen around that hill right back to time immemorial. So yeah, it's certainly an area which is steeped, if you like, in myth and folklore. Yeah, for sure.
So it's no real surprise then that has continued on into modern times with kind of the modern, and don't get me wrong when I say the modern mythology of UFOs, because it seems to play into the same kind of activities that's been going on there from God knows when.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you look as Tim picked up, we're about 17 miles away from Stonehenge, so literally a stone's throw, if you like, away. Avebury is very close nearby, and as you say, a lot of the crop circles which appear are all in and around the kind of the majority are in and around the Wiltshire area. So yeah, I mean, it's a place. The Romans were fairly close to around here, and it's an area which, as I say, it's steeped in mythology and myth. Yeah.
So when would you how recently have sightings been taking place at these locations?
Well, I mean, I'm currently working on as a contributor for a forthcoming book with John Hanson, who does the Haunted Skies series, which is almost an encyclopedia of UFO sightings in the UK and Europe and the rest of the world. Now, through sort of research, there have been a few sightings. I mean, most people contend that the kind of Warminster phenomena started in '65 and kind of petered out towards the end of the '70s, early '80s. But yeah, there's a I've certainly interviewed people who've seen had reports that go on through the '80s, '90s, and there's even a couple of reports that into 2000 and 2005, but of course not to the intensity that it was back then. But yeah, certainly people still see things.
Well, now you sent me via Facebook a number of photographs. Are these of recent vintage?
Yes, I mean some of those are taken by myself and Skywatching sort of team.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, who go out. I mean. Yeah, I can't remember which photos you referring to.
Yeah, well, there were four photos in a cluster.
Yes. Yeah, well, these are things I've been taken by us in the last kind of year. I mean, again, sorry, can it break? Yeah.
All right, here we go with a break coming up, and we'll be back in just a few moments with Steve and Ben and Tim.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Well, there goes that electricity again.
I'm so electrified tonight.
I tell you, I'm all charged up for the second half of the show. That's for darn sure. Hey, Ben, I have a question here. Okay, you've been involved in the paranormal now for how many years?
Oh, it's hard to put a start to it because like Steve, I used to read The Unexplained. I used to watch Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, and when I was I think I did that for as long as I can remember.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, now when did you first hear about Warminster, and have you ever had anything strange happen to you out there?
Well, I heard about Warminster, basically because when I visited it in 2010, it's probably not as famous as it should be, really, Warminster, in terms of the general UFO community. I heard about all kinds of things. I got a copy of Arthur Shuttleworth's book, the first edition one, off a stall at a conference. But I went there in 2010. I went back there last year, and of course I've met lots of people, including Steve himself, who have talked to me about this phenomenon, this longest UFO flap in history. I talked to Kevin Goodman just last night, and he was talking to me about it and the upcoming conference they got this year. And I hope to go
what
to
is the date? What is the date on that?
It's in August. I can't remember the actual date, but it is in August, and it's it's becoming an annual thing. I think it'll be an annual thing.
That's wonderful. Now, what? Oh, okay. The conferences, they're obviously open to the public, and I'm sure you get a lot of people who are just becoming familiar with the subject and with Warminster and the thing in general. Are there any of the original witnesses showing up to tell their stories?
Well, we had Steve. Didn't we have some last year? We had a few people.
We've got to remember is a lot of those original witnesses aren't no longer with us. The passing of time, we've lost a lot of them. But there's people who had veteran sky watchers from the 70s and that, who had turned up at the conference, which I co-organised with Kevin and Colin last year. I think the conference this year is in September, I believe, early September.
Yep, first weekend. That's right.
And how many years has the conference been going on now?
Oh well, last year the 50th anniversary was the first one that I was involved with. But there's been a number before which were 2010 and 2009 and 2010. There was a couple of events in the town. But you know, thanks to I think Kevin and Colin, it's going to be an annual thing now. So yeah.
Well, how many people have been attending?
Well, last year we had, the room we had was kind of a moderate-sized room, and we had over, 120, 130 people attended for the 50th anniversary, which, it's, for, as Ben said, for a phenomena which has kind of been forgotten, was quite a lot of people actually attended. Yeah, so hopefully, long may it. Let's hope we have an annual conference.
Yeah, and the media were there. The media were involved. The BBC Radio turned up, and it was in the national newspapers again, covering last year's conference. It was really good.
Well, now there was an original town hall meeting in Warminster at the height of the UFO frenzy, and didn't get about 300 or 400 people show up, and they all demanded an answer.
I know that not everyone could fit into the town hall. It's, the town hall's quite big. I mean, it's just down the road from the pub where we had the meeting. But I know that it was the people there were so concerned. This was a Sunday. This happened. It was an August bank holiday, literally the 50th of the day that we had our conference. And getting people out on a Sunday to talk about anything is pretty hard. But the people there were all packed in, and some people had to stand outside in the street. But everyone was really concerned, and so obviously it wasn't. This was something very, very unusual in that town.
This is kind of what happened in upstate New York here when they had the sightings in Westchester County. These big boomerang-shaped objects that were being seen in the sky, and they were coming over and hovering right over, made no sound, hovered right over people's homes and over their automobiles, and hundreds of people saw and observed and photographed these things. And they had a town hall meeting there, which I attended. Dr. Hynek showed up, and Peter Gersten, the UFO lawyer, and they had about 300 or 400 people who demanded answers. Of course, they never got any answers, because what kind of answers can you give people except there are unusual phenomena in the sky? And here we asked for disclosure, Ben, right? I mean, you just interviewed Stephen Bissett just a little while ago. What's your take on disclosure?
Well, a disclosure, meaning the frank and complete admissions by the government for everything they know about this phenomenon that is what we don't. That's what Steve is campaigning for, and a lot of other people like Dr. Stephen Greer and others are campaigning for. The idea is that the government actually do know an awful lot that they're not telling us. For example, they may well have a wreckage. They may well have actually salvaged physical evidence in terms of debris from crashed craft from the Earth's surface, and they're not told anyone about it. I mean, the Roswell incident of 1947 is the most famous, by no means the only one of these possible events. And Steve basically wants the government to come clean on everything they know about that, which is good. It's likely to be considerable. I mean,
you think that the government, what branch of the government knows about this?
Well, this is a good question, because when you say government, which government do you mean? What kind of government do you mean? Because it's becoming.
Yeah, that's a good question too.
It's becoming increasingly clear that government is multi-layered, and it has a large. What I would say is a covert I think there's some level of covert super government involved in this world, and I mean, this is a big subject, and I know maybe not all your listeners will go along with this, but I do think that is the case. And it seems that this phenomenon is handled probably by some that area of that super government. I mean, we earlier on in this program we talked about Admiral of the Fleet, Lord Hill Norton, and he was a very, very senior member of the House of Lords. He was he was extremely well trusted. I mean, he was a part of the strategy committee.
He was the Admiral of the British Fleet.
He was chairman of the joint. He was chief of the defence staff. So he's in charge of the military. He was part of NATO's strategy committee on the nuclear deterrent. So he's not the kind of guy that he's obviously someone who had his mental health very carefully screened. So he's a very, very trusted individual. He commanded a battleship in the Battle of the Atlantic in World War II. Yet he was basically stonewalled when he tried to make inquiries about this. Basically, he's the kind of guy who could tell the Prime Minister what to do. He's so senior, but he was fobbed off. He was basically given brush off letters and things like that in response, which means we're dealing with a situation in which there seems to be a level of secrecy way above anything we're used to within the normal field of, in terms of confidentiality and things like that, in terms of government departments. So it's so where to look for these secrets and who is actually keeping them. That's a good point. That's a good question. I think Steve and maybe Dr. Stephen Greer may not have quite probed that deeply to the point where they can actually get in touch with the people who are keeping the secrets.
Of course, here we have Hillary Clinton, who's running for the presidency over here. And she has stated her interest in the subject and getting whatever information released on UFOs and on Area 51. Now, I did notice that there didn't seem, unlike at the previous primary or debate or whatever they had, at the last election, where anybody who said that they had a UFO sighting was kind of, poo-pooed and guffawed at. Here, nobody has really seemed to have taken that approach with Hillary. I guess she's got a lot of other problems facing her, but apparently she has stated her interest in trying to get to the bottom of this. But they did that before. I mean, Jimmy Carter, of course, had a UFO sighting. And tried to find out what was going on, and nobody would tell him. And of course, good old Ronald Reagan, who should have been, since he's a Republican, he should have gotten the inner word, but apparently he knew nothing. And every time he tried to get up there and make a speech and include aliens in it, they would write it out of his speech, and he'd have to write it back into it. And of course, Bill and Hillary even met with Lawrence Rockefeller as part of the Rockefeller Initiative to try to get some information on this. And the authorities, whoever the authorities may be, like you say, come back and say, well, there's nothing to it, and we closed Project Blue Book in 1969, and we haven't done any investigation since then. And that seems to be the final word. I mean, nobody has budged from that statement in years, and I think myself they're going to stick with it, and unless there's some massive UFO wave or sighting, over the Capitol, or something lands outside the Pentagon. Even then, the government has a way of covering things up and changing the facts. I don't. It's up to them. That's what I always say. If they, whoever they may be, want the public to know of their existence, they could do it in an hour straight, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, whatever these beings are, this entity, this intelligence that is behind this phenomenon, obviously it's hard to know what it's actually thinking about, because it's not human. I mean, we can't put ourselves in their shoes, even if they have 2 feet and 2 legs, because they may not. But if we anthropomorphize, if we sort of say, well, what would I do if I were an alien? It's a bit tricky, because in a sense, they have their own agenda. They have their own outlook on the universe. It may not be the same as ours. But I mean, as far as the government go, I mean, I actually do wonder if the government seems to be so good at suppression and distortion and diversion, which is what these methods they use in terms of psychology and propaganda, that I do wonder if they're not capable of suppressing information. No matter what the quality of the sighting, they may well be capable of distracting people's attention to the point where we deny it. Now, there have been cases of, the Roswell incident of 1947 happened in a remote part of New Mexico, where there wasn't many people around, so it was not difficult for the government to seal off the area and secretly salvage the debris. Now, the thing is, people say, well, if that happened in the middle of a city, they wouldn't be able to do it because too many people would see it. However, there have been cases in large, densely populated urban areas of similar events. In 1987, in 1987, I believe there was a very similar event to Roswell that took place in Nottinghamshire, England, not far from the city of Nottingham, in a very, very built-up area known as the Ashfield District. In 1996, there was an event in a very, very similar, densely populated region of Brazil called Varginha. It's just just outside a large city. So we've got to ask ourselves, if people see something in the sky, look at the Phoenix Lights. The Phoenix Lights, Phoenix is a city the size of 1 million people, and thousands of people saw this unusual object in the sky. Yet Fife Symington, the governor of Arizona, successfully managed to suppress interest in it, and he later came forward and confessed that he had deliberately misled the public to avoid, he didn't want a public panic, he just wanted to maintain law and order within the state. But it makes you wonder, how many, if he confessed, how many others have not?
All right, gentlemen, we have a question here from Ryan in California, and this is open to Ben or Steve, whoever wants to answer, or both of you can. Ryan wants to know, with the Department of Defense from the UK releasing all their UFO files, was there any mention of the thing mentioned in any of these reports?
Well,
you go first.
Take that one? Yeah. As far as I'm aware, the raft of MOD releases which we've had, and I believe there's still a kind of 18 which files still to come, which the MOD said that they'd lost and subsequently now have found, and that they're due to be released. From my knowledge, there's not any MOD files relating to Warminster, as far as I'm aware. You, Ben?
I'm not familiar. I'm not exactly sure what they've actually had. I know that there are more things to be released. Nick Pope has been talking about it, about the fact there is another batch of files coming out of the Ministry of Defence.
Yeah, 18,
I don't know exactly what the. I'm not exactly sure what the actual nature of any of these sightings are. We may have to wait to find out, because I don't think they've been released yet. I think it's coming soon. So who knows? You never know.
Okay, well, do you think then that these files that are being released, do you think that they're really of any substance, or they're just releasing, the nutty files, so to speak, nothing that's really, meat and potatoes, so to speak. They're keeping that to themselves.
From what I gather, you go first, Steve.
Well, I don't think there's meat and potato or much flesh on these. Most of these reports are ones that are sent into the public to the MOD themselves. In fact, a lot of the released files are actually contained a lot of the stuff which UFO investigators themselves sent to the MOD. So these aren't top secret files, although the press like to dress them up as that as when they're released. But yeah, I think that the better stuff's been hidden and probably won't ever come out, unfortunately.
Where do you think? Where's the last place for a UFO report to go? Higher than the Ministry of Defense. Is there some secret group that's keeping tabs of this? Sightings made by military pilots and Rendlesham Forest. Of course, that didn't seem to go very high up when it was originally reported, right?
Well, there are witnesses that have spoken from inside aviation, the armed forces, pilots, air traffic controllers, who have come forward with remarkable stories, and they've attended conferences like the various hearings and various press conferences that you may have seen over the years. which state that they've had the most remarkable experiences. They have put in official reports, and these reports, they've spoken to people within the authorities who then take the report. Now, these are things such as pilots who have seen aircraft the size of they've seen spacecraft or objects a mile across flying within a few hundred feet of their aircraft. And this is not your man walking a dog and seeing a light in the sky. This is definitive. Yet, if you go through the MOD files, you won't find things like that there. You won't find... it's obviously that some of the reports are not found in the MOD. They're not kept by the Ministry of Defence. They go somewhere else. I mean, Nick Pope says, oh, well, they never told me about this if this happened. Well, with all due respect to Nick Pope, he was the public face of British ufology for many, many years. If you had a TV programme about UFOs, you'd give Nick Pope a call. If I had a saucer in the hangar, to quote his phrase, he's the last man on earth I would tell if I wanted to keep it secret. So basically,
he's the public disinformation officer.
Whether he knows it or not, and he's in the perfect position to actually misinform the public, either intentionally or unintentionally. But I know that that obviously the kind of experiences you're talking about when you see these witnesses, it's pretty obvious that these reports are not being kept by the Ministry of Defence and in their files, which they then get published. These files are merely confidential files. They're not top secret. Now, if you, for instance, Rendlesham Forest is perhaps an exception in the sense that there was an official report released. The Holt Memorandum was released. Witnesses came forward, people like Larry Warren and John Burroughs and others came forward after that, which is, I think, maybe an indication of perhaps something that was meant to be top secret did get into the public domain. But there's probably likely to be far, far more than that.
That's why
I'd love to see more.
That's why Colonel Holt despises Larry Warren.
That's a long story.
We did a previous show on that, which people can find in the archives. So that's it is indeed an interesting tale. Now, how about, wasn't there a case where a pilot was actually told to lock and load and shoot at an object?
In 1957, Milton Torres. You want to say, Steve? You want to say that?
No, go on. Yeah. Milton Torres. You go on. You explain it.
Yeah, and he was... Sorry, Milton Torres was a pilot. He was actually scrambled. His aircraft was scrambled in 1957, and he was deployed in his jet fighter. And he headed. He was actually. I think he was at Woodbridge or Bentwaters. I think, or was it somewhere in that area? He was at a base. He headed out into the North Sea, east of Essex, and he got a massive radar return on a huge object, and he reported this in to his controllers, and they said open fire. They said engage and destroy. So he armed his missiles and was about to open fire. But then this often happens actually with the UFO encounters. The electronics on his aircraft failed, and he was not able to actually fire. But he remembered it. He reported this later on in his life, and he's spoken out about it. His son is actually speaking out about it as well. That's a remarkable case.
Now, lucky for him though that his instruments failed.
Well, I mean, when in occasions when there's been encounters between UFOs in terms of combat between two, the humans inevitably come off worse.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he wouldn't be around probably to tell the tale if he'd fired.
Well, Ben? What would you say is the intelligence behind these objects? Is there one intelligence or several intelligence, or what's going on here? Like we're going to get it. Like we're going to be able to solve. Like we're going to be able to solve the mystery in the last half hour. Oh,
oh my goodness, we haven't. Unfortunately, we don't seem to be actually any closer to actually answering that question than we were maybe 50 years ago. I mean, unfortunately, we're dealing with something that it's obviously intelligent. It obviously has a will of its own and a consciousness of its own. But what it is and where it comes from, I don't know. I mean, maybe more than one place. Who knows?
That would seem to be the case, and of course, people put different significance onto the subject. Some people see it as a religious event in their lives. Other people see it as a hostile invasion of the planet, and others are waiting for the arrival of these friendly space brothers.
It could be. Somebody will say they're demons and angels.
Aliens. Demons. We forgot to mention that. Okay. All right. We'll save that for our demonic.
So it could be all of those things.
Yeah.
Or maybe none of those things, or all of the above.
False flags. It's a false flag.
Cold, yeah.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, we're going to have our last commercial break, and then we'll be coming back with the last half hour with Ben Emlyn-Jones, Steve Wills, Tim Swartz, and me. I'm Tim Beckley, in case you didn't know.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Here we are in the last segment of Exploring the Bizarre, and tonight we're talking with Ben Emlyn-Jones and Steve Wills. And Steve, I was curious about the Warminster UFO flap. I know when I was doing some just kind of warm up research before the show tonight, I ran across an article that just it definitively declared, and the title was the Warminster hoax. And it was obvious from reading this article that the author had no real knowledge of what had happened, but this person's mind was completely made up. And I mean, they weren't going to be dissuaded, one way or the other. I mean, it was definitely a hoax. So, what was the skeptical reaction? I mean, at the beginning, and continuing on today with the Warminster UFO flap.
Well, I think a lot of that stems towards the Gordon Faulkner photograph in the first instance. Though that particular photo is controversial. And for many people, people say it's hoax. Some people say it isn't. I mean, I've spoken to Gordon's daughter, who informs me. She said, "Well, all these years he's never let on to me that it was fake. If that was the case, so he still maintains that photo is genuine." But a lot of the naysayers, for want of a better word, the skeptics, tend to pinpoint that photo, and the whole raft of sightings, hundreds and hundreds of sightings tend to get thrown out. So it's generally looked upon that photo and nothing else. But the whole phenomena, if you like, ran for at least kind of 15 years solid. So. I mean, talking about skeptics, I mean, there was a guy called David Simpson in the 70s who kind of perpetrated a number of hoaxes on some of the sky watchers. He done this for what he describes as experimental reason, to see if people kind of embellish stuff that they'd seen. But a lot of the sightings, people had seen stuff up on Cradle Hill, for years. So I mean, to if you dragged in, the whole phenomena and threw it out just because of one photo, I think you'd be doing a misservice, really.
Well, that's kind of like the crop circles, yes. Wasn't it? John and Dave, or Dave and somebody who,
Dave.
Yeah,
Dave.
Said, they were responsible for all of them. I guess they must have had quite a few sleepless nights. I guess they had insomnia. They were out there in the dead of night with their stomping boards, making very amateurish crop circles. Now, how about the more recent ones, which are much more complex? I mean, are you fellows into the crop circles at all? I mean, do you see that as being legitimate, or are we being tricked by somebody?
Well, I mean, I think we all can kind of, we all know that people do make these formations, but, whether or not they make all of them is kind of open to debate. I mean, some of the very first kind of basic crop circles, which, in their essence, the first ones were very, very basic in origin, just basic circles as the original phenomena. I suppose you could liken it to the Tully saucer nest, or UFO landing nest is what people would call them. And a number of those was seen in and around Cradle Hill, Clay Hill, and I think Bratton in the 1980s. I think that's really when crop circles researcher Colin Andrews was first involved in that, and that's where it kind of gets its legs. But before that, it used to be basic circles. Nowadays, of course, it's these elaborate kind of pictograms.
Some with aliens even in the middle of it.
Some of them with aliens. I mean, incredible artwork. I think if I think you have to tip your hat to some of these guys who do it. But undoubtedly, to my mind, I'd say 90% man-made, but fantastic works of art nonetheless.
Well, I have a theory that since the UFO entities, the ultra-terrestrials as I prefer to call them, seem to have the ability to mesmerize and control the minds of many people, that even what makes somebody create a hoax? Maybe they are, without realizing it, having their mind controlled to the extent that they actually go out there and add to the phenomena, whether to confuse people. Maybe these ultra-terrestrials want to confuse people, or maybe they don't. I don't know what direction they're heading in, but some of the things that you think may be a hoax may actually be initiated by the ultra-terrestrials themselves. I can think of a case. In fact, I'm working on a book. It's called Operation Alien Mind Control, and there's a case that goes back. It was reported by the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO, I think in the late 50s or early 60s. It was a seaside resort in Brazil, and I've written this up. I can't remember the name of the town. But the UFO, it was actually photographed. It appeared over the town, I think, for a couple of days in a row at high noon. And there were numerous people in that town who did not know each other, who lived in separate areas, who started channeling, and the messages that they received were remarkably similar in nature. So even though the craft were in the sky, they seemed to have the ability to control the minds of mere earthlings far below.
Yeah, well, yes, it's an interesting. I mean, you could say where does inspiration come from anyway, couldn't you? But but I mean, even within the man-made circles, strange paranormal type experiences, people have, these strange balls of light don't seem to mind whether they're man-made or not. They seem to be seen in and around these formations. People have seen what they described as shadow people in some of the formations. Other people have had kind of healing experiences within man-made circles. So it's interesting, isn't it?
Well, there seems to be no end of this. I mean, some people, of course, just can't get into the groove. They think that it's all nonsense and nothing to it, and it's people's fantasy-prone imagination and so forth. But anybody who has bothered to study this or read up on it or talk to a good half dozen or dozen witnesses realize that there's something here that really does have an impact and controls people's lives, and you never know what the next big thing or the next big event is going to be. And just when you think, well, before the sightings in Chicago at the O'Hare airport, there had not been a UFO sighting or anything in the news for quite a while, and then that hit, and it was in the news day after day after day for probably how the media, if they latch onto something, they will fixate on it forever. I mean, it's like there is no other news event in the world for a while. And so, just when you think that the subject is dead and will never reemerge, something will come along that will just blow a bluster into the wind. And,
Agree. Yeah. Sure.
And,
Yeah. I mean,
it's done this for hundreds of years, if not perhaps longer than that.
yeah.
So
No,
now,
absolutely.
yeah. Now, Ben, besides the UFOs, you do tackle other phenomena. Anything happening
Yes,
out there that you might want to tell us about?
Oh, well, I was talking to a very interesting lady the other day who, when she was a young girl, she was on holiday with her grandparents, and this is in Angus in Scotland. And she was walking down a country lane, she came across a large creature, which was a humanoid, upright, ape-like creature covered in fur, exactly like the Bigfoot you have in North America. And she was only 7 years old, so she turned around and ran screaming. So, but she's never forgotten it. Charmaine Fraser, her name is, and she's worked out that the Bigfoot might actually exist in the British Isles, which is really quite incredible. That's was one of the most unusual and interesting things I've heard recently.
You know, speaking of Scotland, the Scottish UFO Research Group is about to have their annual convention. I don't remember the exact date. Yeah, but it's coming up, maybe the first or second weekend in June, and if anybody
June 25th.
Okay. If anybody I may have the gal who runs the conference on the air. I've got an email out to her, but anybody, I guess, who wants information on that can always just Google. What is the name of the exact name of the group? Do you know offhand?
It's the Scottish UFO and Paranormal Conference 2016. It's Alison Dunlop, I think, is the lady you're talking about.
Oh yeah, yes.
Charmaine's going to be there, actually.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Charmaine's one of the speakers talking about the Squatch.
You know, I wish it was easier for me to travel. Not only do I have a few health issues, but be darned if I could stand in line 3 hours to get onto an airplane. That you're cramped in once you get on. And before you get on, it's even more misery that confronts you. You know, I mean, it really boggles the mind why they can't get this a little bit better, organized. Why it would take 3 hours to go through a couple of metal detectors and be patted down. You know, I don't know. It's just It's got me going.
It's a long way, I know.
It's got me going back on the train and the bus, and taking more local trips.
Yeah, I started to say you can't get to Scotland by bus from Manhattan to.
Well, you know, I did take a course on my trip to England back there in the 80s. I did take the night coach from London to Inverness, and I must say,
nice.
Oh, it was the loveliest scenery that I have ever seen anywhere in the world. And I have been to Tahiti. I've been through the Southwest. I mean, I've been to a lot of places, but just rolling hills and greenery like you can't imagine. No wonder Nessie has made its home there.
Yeah. It's lovely up there. It's a lovely.
But boy, come the last week of September, the fog rolls in, and it gets really, really damp. I mean, the town of Inverness closes up. In fact, for some reason, I took the last weekend before the close of the season, and I stayed at a bed and breakfast. A very, very charming elderly lady. In fact, when she found out that I had spoken at the House of Lords, she invited all her friends, including the minister and the milkman and the postman and so forth. And some of them had some very good UFO sightings that took place either directly over the loch or in the woods nearby. And one of my favorite stories is how the milkman said that he would not drive by that big mansion on the other side of the loch that was occupied by the rock and roll star, because every time he would drive by there, the dog, his pet dog that he would have in the in the van with him while he delivered the milk would go crazy and eat up the upholstery. and of course, that was the mansion that was rented previously by Aleister Crowley and later on by the Led Zeppelin Jimmy Page. Yeah. So Robert
Jimmy Page.
Jimmy Page. And of course, now I've done a little research. I know Kenneth Anger, who I met under very strange circumstances. He stayed there for a while and actually got, I guess, Led Zeppelin to do the theme for his little underground movie. But then the tapes disappeared, and there was a whole rigmarole about that. And I was going to say heads were going to roll, and they certainly did, because some of the people who had rented that particular mansion claimed that at night something strange would roll down the hallway, and it looked like the head of somebody who had been decapitated.
Well, according to legend, Aleister Crowley, Aleister Crowley carried out a spell there called the Abramelin Working, which is one of the most dangerous spells you can actually do. And he did this in, I think it was around 1900, turn of the 20th century. But he got a letter from his solicitor when he was halfway through the spell, which takes 6 months to perform, basically saying he was in trouble, someone was suing him. So he basically dropped everything and went to Paris to deal with this legal situation in France, and he left the spell unfinished, and that's extremely dangerous, and that is why Boleskine House is so is a hotbed of paranormal activity to this day.
Well, go ahead, Tim.
Well, I was just going to say, that place just burnt down not too long ago.
Yeah, they had a big fire there.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, that's a shame. But I don't know if there's any paranormal. Probably half it was destroyed.
Some people claim that, of course, Aleister Crowley was responsible for creating the Loch Ness Monster through doing some sort of ritual.
I heard that.
But then Aleister Crowley
did have a.
He had a reputation for stroking the media of the day, and so I do suspect that we can only take a small portion of what he said at the face value. Sorry, Aleister, if you're listening, I didn't mean that. It's the other Tim who said that, not me.
Yeah, I think people were seeing the Loch Ness Monster long before Aleister Crowley was in the area.
Well, I think the first sighting goes back to maybe 1500 or so, 1540. Saint, help me out here because I'm not a Catholic. Saint, somebody or other.
Saint Columba.
Yeah, that's correct.
Saint Columba. Yeah, that was actually 1,000. That was about. I think that was the 5th century. It was much older, but he apparently saw this creature when he was crossing over the River Ness near Loch Ness, and apparently the creature attacked him in the boat or something. But he said prayers and it went away.
I thought you were going to say attacked him in the buttocks. Well, maybe he
might well have
too.
done. Yeah,
could have done that too.
It could be. Yeah.
There's a fellow. He's since deceased, by the name of Holiday. I don't remember his first name, like F.W. Holiday or something.
Frank. I think it's like Frank Holiday.
Yeah, Frank Holiday, who wrote a couple of books on Loch Ness, and even had an incident involving the Men in Black who watched him from the shoreline. And he said that throughout England, in many of the old cathedrals, there were carvings, figures on the cathedral walls, like gargoyles and stuff, of dragons and etchings of discs. So apparently this phenomena, Loch Ness, sea serpents, UFOs, have been combined together over the centuries, almost as if it were, one item, and not separated until modern times. I think it's only in recent times, since 1947, that ufologists decided that the ETH, extraterrestrial hypothesis, was the only one that deserved any form of recognition. And I think that you can't prove it, kind of can't disprove it either, except that if you look at all the evidence and all the reports, they do not behave as if they were astronauts. Now, I don't expect them to behave like we would go, if we went to the moon or something. But boy, do they act bizarre. I mean, am I right, Ben? I mean, they're just most of these cases are just totally off the wall.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of when people have these experiences, they're often it's almost like they enter another state of consciousness, or they're very physically, powerfully affected, like the lady that Steve was talking about in Warminster, who was hit by a sonic boom. Very often they find themselves thinking and doing and saying things they wouldn't normally think and do. Jenny Randalls has, he's a ufologist. She has a phrase called the Oz factor.
That's correct.
It's sort of, it's like that when you're in, it's not just you see something strange. When this thing appears, it's like you're suddenly found yourself in a world, almost like you've gone up to the land of Oz. You're not. It's almost like you're in a different world when this thing's around.
Fellas, I hate to cut you short, but we're down to the last 4 or 5 minutes here. 4 minutes till closing, and I want to give the both of you, Ben and Steve, the opportunity to tell us what you're up to, how people can reach you, what your websites are, Facebook, the next event. So why don't we start out with you, Steve?
Okay, well, like as I say, I'm currently working on a book project with John Hammond, which will be a Wiltshire edition of UFO sightings, from which Warminster will be fairly heavy, orientated on. So look out for that one. That's coming out somewhere soon. If people want to reach me, they can catch me via the Facebook page, which is Warminster UFO Skywatching. Hopefully there'll be a dedicated website up soon anyway, but that's the best way to contact me.
Very, very fabulous material information there. And Ben, where do people go to see your documentaries? Your movie? They're quite phenomenal. I mean, I take them seriously, but I get a good chuckle out of them. You're a really good journalist, man, and you got your heart into it, and you know how to get down with the public.
Oh, thanks, mate. Well, I've got a website, which is HPANWO, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. There's a main site, which is also a portal to all my other sites, which includes my YouTube channel, Ben the Junior Porter, or JR Porter. It's actually originally JR, where I put up videos every so often. I'm like Steve, I'm writing a book at the moment. It's called, I've nearly finished, actually, so hopefully that'll be available very soon. It's called Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure, and it's a fictionalized account of my various ideas to do with the UFO issue and the disclosure of it, which we've been talking about this evening.
What's your latest upload on YouTube?
Well, I'm actually uploading something right now, which is called UFO Disclosure 2016, a probe, which is actually about a conference that I've just been to. It's a report on a conference I've just been to. So,
I hope you record the conference in Warminster for all of those who can't be there. And I wish there was a way that I could send a little video chat or something to tell about my sighting. So maybe we can work on that too.
Oh well,
yeah,
definitely. Well, I'm happy to include that. I'm happy to include that.
Absolutely, yes. Anyway, we have come to the close of another episode of Exploring the Bizarre. And Tim, we've been on, I think we're up to almost 40 episodes or something like that. I mean, we've been going gung-ho on this now for quite a while. And of course, our YouTube channel is available. We got probably 80 or 90 videos up at Mr. UFO's Secret Files. Or you could just type in Tim Beckley. Go to Amazon, type in Tim Beckley. Go to YouTube, type in Tim Beckley. Go to Google, type in Tim Beckley, but don't believe half of what you read.
That's right, and be on the lookout for our new book as well, just out today.
Indeed it is. And anyway, we will be back next week, and tell your friends and invite them over and turn up the sound and get ready to explore the bizarre. Good night, everybody. Good night, Tim. Good night, Ben. Good night, Steve.
Thanks,
guys.
Mrs.
Calabash, wherever you
Cheers.
are.
Night. See ya.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Bye. Bye.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on exploring the bizarre, and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the bizarre.